It happened in the middle of a question about household chores, not at the dramatic peak of the game, not in the charged silence before a final fast money answer. In the middle of an ordinary exchange on an ordinary afternoon when Steve Harvey asked a man named Thomas Ose what task he most dreaded doing around the house, and Thomas Ose opened his mouth to answer and something else came out entirely. Not a joke, not a wrong answer. The truth. The truth, as it turned out, had been waiting in Thomas for quite some time, and it chose this particular moment. 2 cameras pointed at his face, 200 strangers watching, his wife standing 5 feet to his left to stop waiting. He said 12 words. 12 words in response to a question about chores, and Steve Harvey's entire bearing changed. The game show energy, the warm professionalism, the practiced rhythm of a man who has hosted this program for 16 seasons without missing a beat. All of it stepped aside in about 3 seconds. Steve Harvey lowered the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Thomas's wife, Adiz, who was standing very still with the expression of a woman who has just heard something she already knew but had not expected to hear said aloud on television in front of 200 people. He looked at the production team, then he looked back at Thomas. "I cannot keep going," Steve Harvey said quietly, not to the audience, to Thomas. "I cannot just ask the next question after what you just said. That is not something I can do." The game was over. Something more important had begun. Thomas Ose was 49 years old and had lived in the United States for 22 years, having emigrated from Ghana in 2002 at the age of 27 with a degree in civil engineering, a moderate command of English that improved rapidly once he had reason to use it constantly, and the particular combination of ambition and patience that long immigration journeys tend to either build or erode, depending on the person. In Thomas's case, they built it. He had worked initially in a structural engineering firm in Houston as a junior draftsman, accepting the lower position without complaint, because he understood that the credential transfer process required him to demonstrate competency in the American context before the American context would recognize his Ghanaian qualifications as equivalent. He had spent 4 years doing this, working precisely, learning the specific conventions of his adopted profession, and completing the licensure requirements that would allow him to practice independently. He received his professional engineer license in 2006. By 2010, he was a senior project engineer. By 2015, he was running his own small firm, specializing in infrastructure work for municipal clients in the Houston metro area. He had met Adiz Mensah in 2004 at a Ghanaian Community Association event in Houston. She was 28, a registered nurse who had emigrated 2 years before Thomas and who had navigated the credential recognition process with the same methodical persistence he recognized in himself. She was, from the first conversation, someone he found easy to be completely honest with, which was for Thomas an unusual experience and therefore a significant one. They married in 2006. The ceremony incorporated elements of both their family traditions. Thomas's family was Akan. Adiz's family was Igbo, and was, by the account of everyone who attended, both beautiful and memorably long. They had 3 children over the following 9 years, Kofi, now 17, Abina, 15, and their youngest, Kwame, who was 12 and had inherited his father's methodical temperament and his mother's complete inability to be intimidated by authority. The family had been built over 18 years with the same care Thomas brought to his engineering work. Attention to foundation, respect for load-bearing capacity, and the understanding that what held under ordinary conditions was not always what held under extraordinary ones. They had been tested by the ordinary, extraordinary events of a long marriage, financial pressure in the early years, the particular stress of raising children between 2 cultural worlds, the distance from extended family that immigration imposed, and they had held. Not without difficulty. With it, and through it, and on the other side of it, still together. The extraordinary condition that had arrived 18 months before the taping was not one Thomas had anticipated, because no one anticipates a prostate cancer diagnosis at 47, even when the family history suggests elevated risk, even when the physician has been recommending more frequent screening for 2 years, even when the intellectual knowledge that it is possible coexists comfortably with the emotional certainty that it will not happen yet. The diagnosis had come in February of 2023. The cancer was localized and had been caught early, which the oncologist described as genuinely good news delivered in the same register that oncologists use when they want to be accurate without minimizing. The treatment path, radiation therapy, followed by monitoring, had been completed successfully by the following November. Thomas's most recent scans were clear. His prognosis was, in his oncologist's measured language, excellent. He had not told his children the full picture during treatment. He and Adiz had made this decision together, deliberately, reasoning that Kofi, Abina, and Quaim were at ages where the information would produce significant anxiety without producing any corresponding capacity to help, and that what children needed during a parent's illness was the parent's presence, not the illness's details. They had told the children only that their father was receiving treatment for something the doctors had caught early, and that the doctors expected him to be fine. The children had accepted this with varying degrees of the same instinct, that there was more to the story than they were being told, and that asking too directly would produce an answer they were not sure they wanted to have yet. Thomas had not told most of his professional network either. He had managed the treatment schedule around his firm's project calendar with the logistical precision of an engineer who is accustomed to managing complex dependencies, and had disclosed to only 3 colleagues, his project manager, his office administrator, and one longtime associate who had noticed the schedule changes and asked directly. All 3 had kept it. What Thomas had not managed as successfully was the interior experience of it. He had gone through diagnosis, treatment, and recovery with his characteristic composure intact from the outside, which was the composure Adiz had come to know over 18 years, and which she recognized, from the inside of their marriage, as not the same thing as being unaffected. She had watched him carry it. She had tried to carry it with him, and had sometimes been allowed to, and had sometimes encountered the specific, well-intentioned wall that people who are accustomed to being the strong one construct around the experience of not being strong. The Family Feud application had been Adiz's idea, submitted in December 2023, 1 month after Thomas's treatment concluded, and his scans came back clear. She had submitted it because they needed something to celebrate, and she did not know yet how to help Thomas do that, and because the show had been a fixture in their household on Friday evenings for years, and because it seemed, in the specific way that good ideas seem, like exactly the right thing. Thomas had been told about the application in January. He had looked at Adiz for a long moment and said, with the dry humor that those who knew him recognized as his primary mode of expressing affection, "You applied without asking me." "I was not sure you would say yes," she said. "I would have said yes," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I did not ask." They had prepared for 10 weeks with the Osei Mensah household's characteristic thoroughness. Thomas, Adiz, their nephew Emmanuel, Adiz's sister Chidinma, and Chidinma's husband Patrick. They had studied survey categories, practiced timing, and discussed the psychology of common answers with an analytical rigor that occasionally made their Friday preparation sessions feel more like engineering project reviews than game show rehearsals, which everyone found both entirely appropriate and quietly amusing. The children were not in the family lineup for the taping. The format required 5 adult players, and the logistics had worked out differently. But Kofi, Abina, and Quaim had come to Los Angeles anyway, seated in the studio audience with Adiz's mother, who had flown from Lagos specifically for the occasion, and who had very strong opinions about what survey answers the average American was most likely to give, some of which were correct. The family the Osei Mensahs were paired against was the Blackwood family from Memphis, 4 siblings, and a cousin whose competitive dynamic had clearly been established over decades of family gatherings, and who brought to the studio floor an energy that was simultaneously warm and entirely focused on winning. They were excellent opponents. The main game between the 2 families was the kind that studio audiences remember, close throughout, with lead changes and near misses and moments where both families were genuinely funny without trying to be. Thomas played the main game with the quality of attention that his profession had refined over 20 years. He was precise without being rigid, quick without being impulsive, and possessed of the specific patience that comes from spending a career making decisions whose consequences only became apparent months or years later. Steve Harvey had noticed him in the first exchange of the main game and had found, in Thomas, someone whose composure was interesting rather than opaque, the composure of a person with depth behind it rather than absence. The Osei Mensah family won the main game by 8 points, which was a margin that felt precarious in the room and that Thomas experienced privately as exactly sufficient. The game moved into its pre-fast money segment, during which Steve Harvey conducted the brief, warm exchanges with each family member that were part of the show's rhythm. He was working his way along the Osei Mensah family when he paused at Thomas with one of his standard banter questions. the kind designed to be light and easy, and to give the contestant a moment of relaxed personality before the pressure of fast money. Thomas, Steve said, with the warmth of a man who has conducted 10,000 of these exchanges and still means each one. What is the one household chore you absolutely dread most? The one that makes you look at your wife and think, can you please just handle this one? The audience laughed, because it was a relatable question with an obvious comic structure, and because Thomas's expression in the half-second before he answered suggested he had an answer ready. He did have an answer ready. It was not the one he gave. What Thomas Osai said in the conversational, unguarded register of someone who had been asked a simple question and whose defenses without his awareness had been lowered by 10 weeks of preparation, and the particular quality of Steve Harvey's attention was this. I used to dread all of it, but after last year I dread nothing. I'm just glad to still be here to do it. 12 words. Spoken without drama, without performance, in the same tone he might have used to give a survey answer, because he had not decided to say them. They had simply come. The audience produced a sound that was not quite laughter and not quite silence, the specific ambient shift of 200 people recalibrating simultaneously. Adiz, standing to his left, went still. Steve Harvey's expression changed with the speed of a man whose professional instincts are fast and whose human ones are faster. He had heard what Thomas said. He had also heard what was underneath it, the specific weight of something that does not come out as 12 casual words unless it has been sitting somewhere for a long time looking for a door. He lowered the microphone. He looked at Thomas, then at Adiz, then at Thomas again. I cannot keep going, he said quietly. I cannot just ask the next question after what you just said. That is not something I can do. The room was completely still. Thomas, Steve said. After last year. What happened last year? Thomas Osai looked at Steve Harvey for a moment with the expression of a man who has just said something he did not plan to say and is now considering whether to go through the door he has opened or to close it politely and return to the game. He looked at Adiz. She was watching him with the steadiness of a woman who has been waiting 18 months for him to open this particular door, and who is not going to tell him what to do, but who is also not going to pretend she does not know what is behind it. He went through the door. Last February, Thomas said, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He said it with the directness of an engineer giving a project status update, accurate, precise, without embellishment. The doctors caught it early. I completed treatment in November. My scans are clear. I am told my prognosis is excellent. He paused for exactly one beat. But there is a period between diagnosed and excellent prognosis that I have not talked about much, and I suppose I just did. The studio was quiet in the way it had learned to go quiet in moments like this, not empty, but full of the specific attention of people who have understood that they are no longer watching a game show. Steve Harvey held the silence for a moment before speaking. Thomas, he said, tell me about that period. Thomas looked at his hands briefly, the gesture of a man organizing his thoughts, and then looked up. When you are an engineer, he said, you are trained to solve problems. You receive information, you analyze it, you develop a response, you implement the response. The diagnosis was, in some ways, the easiest part because I knew how to receive information and make a plan. He paused. What I did not know how to do was to be afraid without turning the fear into a task. And I am afraid there is no engineering solution for fear. I tried to find one for several months. Light, genuine laughter from the audience, not at him but with him, with the recognition of someone describing a very human thing very accurately. My wife, Thomas continued, and he looked at Adiz when he said it, spent 18 months watching me carry something that she wanted to carry with me and that I was not always willing to share. Because I was the one who was supposed to be strong. Because I had always been the one who was strong. And I did not know how to be less than that in front of the people I was supposed to be protecting. He stopped. When he continued, something in his voice had changed, not breaking but opening the way a window opens and lets in something that the room needed without knowing it needed it. I am glad to be here, he said. Not on this show, in this world. I am glad to still be doing the chores. I am glad to still be arguing with Quame about football. I am glad to have woken up this morning next to my wife and had the ordinary, unremarkable experience of a Tuesday morning. I did not always know for a period whether I would have those things, and I think I said what I said just now because when someone asks you what you dread, the honest answer when you have been where I have been is nothing. You dread nothing. You are just grateful. The room was completely still for several seconds. Adiz had both hands pressed flat against her chest. She was not crying. She was doing something more interior than crying, the particular internal movement of a person who has been waiting for something for a long time and has just, unexpectedly, received it. Steve Harvey stood in the center of the stage and was quiet in the way he went quiet when the situation required his presence rather than his performance. Then he walked to Thomas, and he did something that the studio audience received as both entirely natural and entirely unprecedented. He put both hands on Thomas's shoulders and looked at him directly, the way a person looks at someone they want to make sure is seen. "You have been carrying this like an engineer," Steve said. "Organizing it, managing it, making sure the structure holds. And it has held. You are here. Your scans are clear. Your family is here." He paused. "But I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it as a real question. When is the last time you let yourself be glad out loud?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Just now," he said. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. "Then we are going to keep going." He turned to face the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man came here today to play a game show. He prepared for 10 weeks. He won the main game. He was 45 seconds away from fast money. And instead he gave us something that no survey answer was ever going to produce." He held the moment. "He gave us the truth about what it means to be grateful, not the word grateful, the actual experience of it. After a year of being afraid and being strong and protecting everyone around him, he just told 200 strangers that he is glad to still be here to do the dishes." He let that settle. "That," he said, "is a man." The audience rose. When the applause had settled enough for movement, Steve reached into his jacket. The exchange with his producer had happened in the few seconds between Thomas finishing and Steve walking toward him, conducted in the economy of a long professional relationship, a question and a nod. "The Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation supports families who have come through something hard and are on the other side of it," Steve said. "Not because coming through it was easy. Because coming through it takes a kind of sustained, daily courage that does not announce itself and does not ask for credit, and that deserves to be acknowledged." He produced an envelope. "This is a check for $15,000 from the foundation. I want you to use it to celebrate. Not celebrate as a euphemism for something responsible. Actually celebrate. Take your family somewhere. Do the thing that you have been putting off because there was always something more urgent. You have been through a year of urgent. You are owed some ordinary joy." He held it toward Thomas. Thomas looked at the envelope for a long moment, then he looked at Adiz, then he took it. "Adiz is going to have opinions about what the celebration should be," he said. "I am sure she is," Steve said, "and I suspect she will be right." "She usually is," Thomas said. "That is one of the things I am most grateful for." Adiz, who had held her composure through everything that preceded this moment, released it entirely at that sentence. She put her face in her hands, and the studio, which had been moved many times in this stretch of 14 minutes, was moved one more time by the specific, simple sight of a woman who has spent 18 months being the steady one finally being allowed to be the one who cries. Thomas put his arm around her. He held on. Fast Money was played after a brief pause that the production team managed with the careful informality of people who understand that the audience needed a moment and that the format could wait. Thomas scored 88 points. Emmanuel, his nephew, closed with 93. The combined total of 181 points did not reach the 200 threshold for the $20,000 prize, which under any other circumstances would have been the dramatic center of the episode. Under these circumstances, it was noted, acknowledged with warmth, and almost entirely beside the point. The episode aired 5 weeks later. The production team's editorial decision was, as it had become in moments of this kind, to preserve the full sequence without compression. 13 minutes and 12 seconds of a game show that had, for those 13 minutes, been something else. The episode received ratings that placed it among the 10 most watched single episodes in the program's recent history. What traveled fastest was not the foundation check, though it was reported accurately and received warmly. It was the 12 words, "I'm just glad to still be here to do it." They appeared in messages between cancer survivors and their families. They were shared in oncology support groups, in caregiving communities, in the private correspondence of people who had been looking for a way to say something they had not known how to say and who found, in Thomas's 12 words, a form that fit. A cancer support organization in Houston cited the clip in their patient newsletter, noting that it had articulated, in 12 words and a game show banter exchange, something they had been trying to help their patients express for years. That the texture of surviving is not primarily fear, but a kind of specific, daily, often inarticulate gratitude for the ordinary. Thomas had not expected any of this. He was, by nature and by professional habit, a man who measured his outputs against their intended purposes, and he had not intended 12 words about household chores to become a public document about cancer survivorship. He received the response with the same quality of quiet, careful attention he brought to everything. He read what people wrote. He allowed himself to be moved by it, and he did not mistake the attention for the point. The point, as he explained in the single interview he agreed to give to a Houston newspaper whose health reporter had written about his case with accuracy and restraint, was simpler than the response suggested. He had gone to play a game show. He had not gone to make a statement about cancer. What had happened was that a direct question, asked by a person paying genuine attention, had found something he had been keeping organized and managed for 18 months and had simply let it out. "I do not think it was brave," he said in language that those who knew him recognized immediately. "I think it was accurate. I was asked what I dreaded and the accurate answer was nothing. I gave the accurate answer." The reporter asked whether he thought the response would have been the same if Steve Harvey had been less attentive. Thomas considered this with the precision he brought to hypotheticals. "No," he said. "There is a kind of attention that creates the conditions for honesty." He was paying that kind of attention. It would not have come out into a room that was not ready to receive it. Adiz gave her own account of the day in a conversation with her sister Chidinma that Chidinma later, with permission, shared partially in a post that reached a significant audience. Adiz said that she had spent 18 months watching Thomas manage his fear the way he managed everything, efficiently, privately, and with a protectiveness that she recognized as love and that had also, sometimes, been lonely. She said that hearing him say, in front of 200 strangers, that he was glad to be there to do the dishes was the first time in 18 months she had felt that the thing they had been through together had been acknowledged as something they had been through together. "He finally let me know he had been scared," she said, "and in telling 200 strangers, he told me." The family went to Ghana 6 months after the taping. It was the first time Thomas had been back since 2019, delayed initially by the pandemic and then by the diagnosis and treatment, which had made international travel inadvisable during the active treatment period, and which had made it feel, in the months following recovery, like something to be planned for properly rather than rushed. They stayed for 3 weeks, visiting Thomas's family in the Ashanti region and Adiz's family in Enugu state across the border. The children, who had grown up between cultures with the specific fluency that children of immigrant parents develop when both parents have stayed meaningfully connected to their origins, navigated both contexts with a comfort that Thomas watched with the particular pride of a parent who has given their children something they cannot fully name but can see clearly. He took Quaim to see a bridge he had worked on in a consulting capacity early in his career, a small municipal bridge in a regional road network that was not architecturally notable, but that was solid and well built, and that was still standing after 15 years, which in Thomas's professional assessment was the most accurate measure of quality available. He told Quaim that most of the work an engineer did was invisible when it was working correctly, and that this was not a failure of recognition but the definition of success. You built things so that they did not require attention. Quaim, who was 12 and possessed of his mother's inability to be intimidated by authority, asked his father if that was also true for people. Thomas said he would think about that. He was still thinking about it. Steve Harvey referenced Thomas on his radio program the week the episode aired, in the characteristically direct way he used when speaking about things that had affected him without performance. He said he had asked a man about household chores, and the man had given him the most honest answer he had received in 16 seasons of asking questions. He said the answer had required him to stop, because some answers change the temperature of a room and you cannot pretend they have not. He said he thought about Thomas's 12 words when he found himself dreading ordinary tasks, and that the thought recalibrated him every time. "That man reminded me," Harvey said, "that gratitude is not a feeling you manufacture. It is what remains when you have genuinely reckoned with the alternative. He reckoned with the alternative for a year, and now he is grateful for the dishes. I am trying to learn from that." The $15,000 from the foundation was used, in the manner Steve Harvey had specified, for celebration. The Ghana trip was the primary expenditure. The remainder went toward a family gathering in Houston in the spring, extended family from both sides, a catered meal at the family home, an evening that was long and warm and somewhat louder than the neighbors preferred, and that everyone present described afterward as exactly what was needed. Thomas gave a toast that evening that his nephew Emmanuel recorded on his phone without asking, reasoning that someone should document it. Thomas spoke for 4 minutes without notes. He thanked his family. He thanked Adiz in the specific, detailed way that long marriages make possible. Not generally, but precisely, naming particular things she had done in particular moments that had mattered in ways he had not said at the time. He said he was sorry for the times he had made her carry something alone that should have been shared. He said he was glad to be standing in this room with these people, making this toast. He said he was glad to still be here. Nobody in the room was under any illusion about what that meant. Thomas Osai still runs his engineering firm in Houston. He has, in the months since the episode, made one professional change. He joined the board of a Houston-based cancer support organization, contributing his organizational competence to their operational infrastructure in the way that engineers contribute to things they decide are worth building properly. He does not speak at public events or appear in the organization's communications. He attends meetings, reviews budgets, and ensures that the structure holds. It is, in the way of most things Thomas does, invisible work done well. He does the dishes without dreading them. He does most things without dreading them. On the mornings when he comes close, when the ordinary frustrations of a busy life and a demanding profession produce the specific small impatience that everyone experiences and that he is not immune to, he remembers 12 words, which he said without planning to say them, which turned out to be the truest thing he had said in a long time. He is just glad to still be here to do it. That is enough. That is, as it turns out, quite a lot.